Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 897. My opponent started off with e4 here, and I went with e6, the French defense. And we get the main line here, d4, d5. Now there's a lot of choice here for white. White can go with knight c3. That allows either the classical variation or the win-hour variation. Knight d2, what my opponent played, is the Tarrasch variation. There's also e5, the advanced variation, or e takes, the exchange variation, all of which are quite respectable lines. So knight d2. And here black has a couple of choices. Well, actually more, but the first two are the main ones, the ones that I've played. So c5 is the way I usually play it, actually. It leads to kind of an interesting position, although it's not very typical of the French. So after this, you can actually get into an IQP type of position like this. So white normally takes, well, looks like it was about 50-50 there, but this is one of the main lines. White can take there and then play knight to f3. Let's say black develops the knight and then bishop to b5. If he comes out with this knight, let's say the other bishop comes out, bishop d6, and now the exchange. And you can see that black has been saddled with an isolated queen's pawn, but what this means is that black will have easy development for his pieces. After castles, it looks like knight g to e7 is the most common move, blocking this file against any checks and maybe defending the knight on c6. So interesting position. I actually looked at this with the chess engine, and it says knight f6 is also playable there, although that would expose the king to a potential check and a pin of the bishop if this bishop comes here. I suppose the black bishop could drop back the dark squared bishop. Anyway, all interesting ways to play. But this game I felt like playing more traditional type of French pawn structure, so that's what this knight f6 move accomplishes, a second choice there. It kind of encourages white to push the pawn forward. The knight hops around, so it seems like the knight is wasting some time, but the knight's in a good position to support the counterplay here with c5, so all this is fine. And white, I think if I were white here, I'd probably just play with bishop d3, getting a piece out. I think that's a reasonable way to play here. But he continued with f4. That's one of the top choices here as well. And I set about undermining the center. So at this point, I'm kind of out of my opening knowledge, but just playing according to the general rules that you usually play with the French defense. It's one of the things that's kind of nice about the French defense is there's a lot of positions like this you can play on general rules without memorizing the specific variations. And you'll see I actually stay in the main line for quite a while, even though I'm just playing over the board, just thinking up the moves as they happen. But I'm just playing the most natural moves. If you played these kind of positions a lot, you develop your pieces and keep putting pressure on the center. So white plays this interesting move, knight d to f3. It's kind of cute little dance going on with the knights. He doesn't want to block this knight, you would think, but this knight has got a different route into the game. It's going to e2, and from there it can come out to g3 or f4. Maybe it'll even support the queen side over here if it gets opened up. So interesting little maneuvers with the knights going on there. I play queen b6. You see once again the top move, just putting more pressure on the center. And also, well, it's looking at this diagonal that's been opened up by those pawn pushes. Maybe makes it awkward for white to castle in some lines. Let's see, white continues on knight e2, and I take. So this is a point at which I'm leaving sort of mainline territory. f6 is the main move here. I don't like to play f6. I've too early. I should put it that way. f6 is a good move. You just have to be careful about playing it too early, because f6 can open up this diagonal to your king, and the queen can come out and give a check here that can be pretty damaging, especially if it has the support from some knights. So you'd have to be careful about that. In this case, though, the queen's path to that h4 check is blocked by a couple of knights, so it appears to be safe to play f6 here. Anyway, I went ahead and exchanged here first and developed my bishop. And white played g3. It looks like we're leaving the book, but actually you'll see we're still inside a mainline position here. Well, it's not so mainline, but it's still in the opening book. And at this point, I played rook e8, and that's when we really leave the book. So once again, f6 is the move here. Although at this point, I really did think about f6, because I was planning to play f6. That's why I had played these moves, bishop here at castling, so I could play f6. But I looked at this, I said f6, he takes here with check, and then he wins the d-pawn, and I said that looks pretty horrible. so it's pretty funny when I looked at it in the postmortem that that's the main line. f6, and bishop takes is certainly the move there, king h8. And now what's interesting is that white doesn't even take that pawn. I looked at this with the chess engine. If you grab the pawn, so you're now 2 pawns up, but you haven't castled yet, and white has pressure here. So for example, if you were to play let's see, what was it? I mean there's kind of a threat here that black is going to take on, oh, that is, yeah, it's black's move here. Black takes on e5. So yeah, there's pressure on this pawn. If you take back with the d pawn, then it opens up this diagonal, and looks like white's going to have a lot of trouble getting castled, and maybe his king will be a bit exposed there in the center. And if you take back with the f pawn, then the knight can grab that d pawn. That's not at all obvious. I guess it has to do with the fact that this knight is potentially loose. It's defended by the bishop. I don't know. It's just crazy tactics going on there. Let's see. The chess engine gave this line after bishop takes d5. I mean, it looks to me like that d-pawn is defended once again, but I don't want to spend too much time on this point. Bishop takes c6, queen takes c6. Now that knight is loose, the king can castle, defending the knight and getting the rook off the diagonal, and then you can push on with e4, and you're still 2 pawns down, right? Yeah, white has these 2 pawns. No, you're just 1 pawn down now. You got a pawn back, and you play on a pawn down here, and you have some compensation. The best line actually is supposed to be this one. After f6, bishop takes check, king h8, e takes f6. That's what the book was recommending, and also the chess engine recommended it. And then after knight takes, just trading off this bishop, getting castled, and then black plays with knight e4. And once again, black is a pawn down and is just playing on for compensation, but it appears that black has enough compensation to make this interesting game. So anyway, that's a little bit of opening theory here. I might try that just to see if I can figure out what's going on over the board, but it looks pretty complicated. Anyway, I just played rook e1. We're out of the opening book, so we'll stay on this page. He castled. But also, white has a pretty good position here. The chess engine always likes these positions where white has more space. So it's giving white a pretty strong evaluation here. Let's see, I continue with knight f8. I'm just maneuvering my pieces around and getting ready for that f6 push. He played b3. b3 maybe not the most accurate move. He could play knight c3. I would continue with bishop d7. And then bishop back to g2. This was a chess engine recommendation. Rook to c8. And then push on with f5. That's how the chess engine would try and prosecute white's advantage to the maximum. So b3, maybe let's a little bit of the pressure off. And I played f6, which was not the most accurate response. The chess engine wants me to play bishop d7 there. But anyway, small inaccuracies, so keeping an advantage to white. He goes bishop d2. It looks a little bit strange, I have to admit, white's plan of putting the bishop behind these pawns. I went ahead and took here. He took back. And then I go with knight g6. So I get the knight back into the game. And I was looking at this this pin here and thinking of taking this pawn here. And it looks like he was tactically alert as well. He went king h1. The chess engine finds a clever way to defend the pawn, which it's kind of like setting a little trap for your opponent. You might think it's safe to take that pawn, but he's got this attack on your queen, so it doesn't work out. So, for example, say knight takes e5, knight takes, you just are a piece up for the moment, but then he has knight a4, and after the queen moves, he can grab that knight back. So actually, you were never a piece up; you were a pawn up. But then this wins the piece back, wins a piece, so that's no good. So that's a kind of clever indirect way to defend against that threat. He played king h1. I went bishop d7. Goes rook c1. And it went knight b4. Another move that's maybe not the most accurate, but it's actually getting a little bit tricky to find best moves for black here. Chess Engine gives queen a6 as a top choice. So knight b4, the problem with this is the knight gets kicked around a little bit. He goes a3. I drop back to a6. But I still think this keeps us in the range of playable, but maybe white has a little more of an advantage than he should have at this point. Let's see, I went bishop b5 here. He went rook to g1. Go knight to c7. He goes knight to f4. So that knight that started on g1, it went to e2. Yeah, so it looks like it was looking at the f4 square. And now I pretty much have to take. I was not sure. You can play rook f8 here, but he'll take and give you these doubled pawns. That was like the second choice, but just exchanging, yeah, knight takes knight was the move here. He takes back, so we kind of forced that exchange, and then he's opening up this g file. So I got my king out of the way so I can bring a rook over and defend. He hops in with knight g5. And he's just got too much pressure on my center here, so I'm pretty much forced to take once again. And this also turns out to be the best move. And then he took with the pawn. I was a little bit surprised at this, and I said, well, maybe he should take with the rook. The chess engine, at first it prefers taking with the rook, and then it prefers taking with the pawn, and eventually it settles on them being about even. It seems like I can defend with rook g8, so it's not like this is fatal. But I just think the play is easier for white. White has a half-open file to pile up on. And, you know, if I set up a blockade with the pawns, he can maneuver this light squared bishop around and push the h-pawn forward to try and soften up my king side. So I just think it would be easier for white to play that way. So he played f takes g5, and now, you know, it's hard to see how his attack is going to break through. I went rook f8. And up to this point, though, I would say white has kept his opening advantage, and then it's this next move is just a blunder, rook c2. So if you want to pause and see if you can spot the tactic I missed. Okay, if I pointed it out like that, you should have been able to spot it. The bishop here is just a skewer and will win the exchange. So at this position, I missed that move. I was noticing that he's just got to come over here and double and get some pressure on the king side, and I was looking forward to bringing my bishop around to defend on the king side, and I wasn't thinking about tactical vulnerabilities there. But of course, tactics can pop up at any time. No matter how well motivated your opponent's move is, you should look for those hidden weaknesses, or in this case, not so hidden. Some of those weaknesses are right on the surface like that. So anyway, I played bishop e8, which I give a question mark. It was actually, you know, the best move, except for the tactic. So if it weren't for the tactic, then it would have been a good move, but of course winning the exchange is just better. And then he went rook cg2. So at this point, actually, so rook c2 was a blunder, and black is winning, and now bishop e8 gives the advantage back to white. To keep the advantage, though, white needs to play a little differently. So the chess engine is recommending this line, queen c1. Putting pressure on this knight. This knight is a little vulnerable there at on the c7 square, so needs to move away. Rook to c5. Now, the nice thing about that knight b4 move was that it was putting pressure on the pawn, so the rook there goes to harass the knight and also to prevent me from just taking that pawn. And at this point, let's see, I play a6 to give the knight an escape square. White can play a5, kicking the knight, and the knight drops back to a7, and the knight will get back into the game via c6 there, but the chess engine likes white in this position, so this is how white can keep an edge. So in the game, let's see, we had this exchange of blunders, rook c2, bishop to e8, and then rook c to g2, and here the momentum has switched. Even though that was not a blunder, it was not the most accurate move, and suddenly black is actually a little better in this line. And it all starts with this move bishop g6. Now the problem is I'm going to come in here and expose some attacks against his king, and this queen is kind of lurking here along this diagonal as well. It's just blocked by that pawn, which black has to be, or white has to be careful to keep supported at all times. So so for example, and then his next move was an outright blunder. He played bishop g4, ignoring the threat, and the second time I spotted the skewer, so I picked it up that time. But even if he hadn't played into that mistake, if he had played something like, well, the chess engine says the best line goes like this: rook d2. I still have the check. He can block with the bishop now. And then king g8. There's no longer any threat on the g file. Get the king back over. Bishop takes, allowing, you know, this is a little counterintuitive, you know, allowing this pawn exchange here. And now here's an interesting line. I just said, well, what if white just goes after that? It's is kind of like it's an isolated pawn, I guess you would consider it. So say rook e2, e3, pushing the pawn forward, taking, and then queen c6, check. So that's the point, is that you just throw that pawn away to open up a diagonal against the king, and say rook g2 to block the check. The rook f2 comes in and wins, hitting the bishop and hitting the rook. So so that was just a bad line for white. But even the best line is, let's see, it's, g6 here. So I play h6 to avoid opening up any lines. Queen e2 and knight to d5. I get a nice perch for that knight, and I still have ideas of opening up this diagonal by pushing the pawn forward. And I'm just ready to sacrifice it, and it seems like black is just better in these positions. It's kind of a case of good knight versus bad bishop. If you went into an endgame, I think it would be pretty good for black. But it's also good in the middle game too, because you have the open king as well with the queens on the board. Is also going to be a problem for white. One curious wrinkle here is that normally in the French defense, it's black that has the bad bishop and white has the good knight. So things have been completely reversed. Black got the good knight and white got the bad bishop in that line. Anyway, so that is why, and this position is already favorable to black. And then after bishop g4, I'm just winning materially because I win the exchange here. So this is getting to be a long video. Let's just go forward. There's no big mistakes in this part, and we're both playing reasonably accurately. I pick up the exchange and reduce the material around his king, and he advances against my king here and tries to get some pressure. And it's just a little bit hard. There's no direct attack that breaks through, and we're both using up lots of time. And this game had a shorter increment than usual, only a 3-second increment. So at some point I get really low on time. And so I've been playing really well up to this point. But this next move, queen h4, is a mistake. So in this position, the chess engine would play with queen f5. So just kind of maneuvering around with the queen, but keeping it flexible, keeping it looking in both directions. And over here, it was kind of sidelined a little bit. But anyway, after queen f5, for example, let's see, white could go queen b3, trying to activate his queen, maybe get play on the queen side here. This knight a8 is suggested. The knight would like to come here, and then it has a nice anchor where it's looking out towards the center. So white will block, and then, well, the knight now can go to c7 and try and get into the game via this square, perhaps. Maybe pawn here, knight here, or maybe it comes back around this way. Anyway, you know, it seems like it's a struggle to get that knight into the game, but that's the focus. Get the queen to a good square, and then try and get the knight into the game. Anyway, I played queen h4. He pushed on with b5. He could have kept more pressure on with the queen c2. It was just an alternative, I guess. But I think this is... Oh, it shows why queen h4 is a little bit of a mistake, although black is actually still better here. But queen c8 putting pressure, rook c8 defending it, queen c2 attacking the knight, rook c8 defending it, bishop to e3, h6. Now the idea, you'll see in a minute, is to allow the queen to come back here. So it seems like I have to regroup and escape from that square. But now my knight's free to move with the tempo, and I can regroup, and I still have that material edge. But maybe it's getting locked up and hard to break through. Maybe he can keep me at bay with his two bishops and his queen. Might be a hard game to win. Anyway, he went b5. and I went b6, which second slight mistake. Right here the chess engine would start maneuvering with the knight, going knight to a8, and if he plays a5 to push on with b6 at that point. So if he trades, I take with the knight. If he pushes, then I'll just bring the knight out via c7 again. So after b6, after those two mistakes, queen h4 and b6, they're not real mistakes, they're just inaccuracies, I guess. White is back in the game with queen c2, and after I take this pawn, this should actually be a draw. Queen takes pawn was not a mistake. It's still pretty close to being drawn before that move. But well, let's play on. This is still a drawing at this point. Queen takes. I played queen to d3. These were all accurate moves according to the chess engine. And then he played h6, and that gives the draw away. So here is the drawing line. I just wanted to show you because it's not obvious, even after seeing it, that it's a draw. So bishop g4, attacking the e-pawn here. Queen f1 with a check, taking advantage of the rook and my control of the f-file. King here, queen up check, queen f2 check, king here, holding on to the bishops, then d4. And, well, the line continues, but it's all 0, 0, 0 according to the chess engine. The thing is, it's a very dynamic kind of position, so things could still go wrong. But I think the idea is, you know, I mean, he can still start harassing my pieces with moves like bishop there to chase my rook off that good f-file. I can't really leave the back rank. So it looks like White has lots of possibilities here. But materially, I have one pawn and a rook for two bishops. So materially, it's about even. And if his bishops leave the area around the king to go after my pieces here, then that opens up squares from which I can check his king. So I think that's the mechanism, basically, is that if he gets too active with his bishops, they leave defense of the king, and then I can get into a perpetual check and draw the game that way. So that's why it should be drawn. But he played on with h6. And now it's just losing. That lets me get the piece back, so I'm up the exchange once again. And then he went king h2. So there's actually a mate in 4 here if you guys want to test your abilities to find the tactics. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm giving the answer away now. There's actually a couple different ways to do it. So let's see, the first way was here. And whichever way the king runs, then you bring the rook in with check. This all has to be done with check because you're very close to getting checkmated here. But this is only one square for the king, and then it's check and mate. And something similar happens if he runs to h1. You just have to remember to keep doing it all with check. Check here. That drives him back, and then mate. And then, or another way to do it is you could start with this move, queen h5 check. Let's see if he comes forward. If he comes forward, then you have this kind of mate with the rook coming in. And if he steps here, you can come forward with the queen. How's this work? Goes here. You have this check. Here, goes back, and that's mate. So anyway, there's mates all over the place, kind of a pretty exercise for you. But I was very short on time at this point, and I was just trying to not get mated myself, so I cleared off a little bit of space there. That also opened up the g-file for my rook and played on. Let's see, there's one more chance. After king g1, there's a mate in 2 here, if you want to look for it. Okay, pretty easy to see this one, but pause the video if you want time to check it out. I'm giving the answer away now. It's queen here, check, king there, and rook up is mate. So pretty straightforward, but I didn't spot it, and I was more concerned about keeping on checking, which that was, of course, but I was just trying to keep the checks going so that I didn't run out of time, and also so that I didn't get in trouble myself. So I did all of this with check, and now I forced an exchange of queens. and then he resigned here. This would be pretty easy to win even without much time, so he decided to resign at this point. Anyway, a fascinating game, I thought. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Bye.